The moment Judge Patricia Williams pulled those documents from the sealed envelope, I watched Marcus Wellington's entire world collapse. The CEO of Atlas Motors, the man who had stood on stage at the Detroit Auto Show bragging about safety innovation, turned gray as ash. His team of 7 lawyers sat paralyzed, because those 49 pages I had written 4 years earlier, the pages they swore under oath didn't exist, were now sitting in front of a federal judge with my name, my signature, and a date stamp that proved everything. 12 people had died because of what that report warned about. 12 families had been destroyed. And I, David Chen, the quality control engineer they had fired and called useless, had spent 4 years fighting to make sure their deaths weren't forgotten. But before I tell you what happened in that courtroom, I need to take you back to the beginning, to the day I discovered that the company I trusted was willing to kill people to protect their profits. And if you think you know where this story goes, I promise you the truth is far worse than anything you can imagine. Stay with me until the end, because what was uncovered in that courtroom didn't just change my life. It triggered the largest automotive recall in American history and sent 3 executives to federal prison. If this story resonates with you, hit that subscribe button and click the bell, because every week we bring you real stories of people who found justice when they least expected it. My name is David Chen, and I was born in San Francisco to immigrant parents who had come to America with nothing but hope. My father worked in a restaurant kitchen for 30 years, starting as a dishwasher and eventually becoming a line cook. My mother sewed clothes in a factory, her fingers calloused from pushing fabric through industrial machines 12 hours a day. They never complained. Not once. They believed in the American dream with a faith that sometimes broke my heart. In this country, my father would say, if you work hard and do the right thing, you will be rewarded. He said it so often that I believed it too. I was the first person in my family to go to college. I studied mechanical engineering at UC Berkeley, working nights as a security guard to pay for the textbooks my scholarship didn't cover. I slept 4 hours a night for 4 years. I ate ramen noodles so often I still can't look at them without feeling nauseous. But I graduated with honors, and when I walked across that stage to receive my diploma, I saw my parents in the audience, crying with joy. That moment made every sacrifice worth it. After graduation, I landed a job at Ford Motor Company as a junior engineer. I spent 5 years there, learning everything I could about automotive safety systems. I became obsessed with the idea that the cars people drove could protect them instead of killing them. Every statistic about traffic fatalities felt personal to me. Every life lost was someone's parent, someone's child, someone's reason for living. In 2015, I received a job offer that seemed too good to be true. Atlas Motors, the fastest-growing American automaker in decades, wanted me to lead their quality control division for brake systems. The salary was nearly double what I was making. The benefits were incredible. And the company's marketing emphasized their commitment to putting safety first. I thought I had found my dream job. Atlas Motors was headquartered in suburban Detroit, in a gleaming campus of glass and steel that looked like something out of a science fiction movie. The company had disrupted the auto industry with affordable, stylish vehicles that appealed to young families. Their flagship model, the Atlas Voyager, was everywhere. In driveways, parking lots, advertisements. It was the car that had made the company's founder, Marcus Wellington, a billionaire. My first day was in January 2016. I remember the cold Michigan winter, the excitement buzzing through me as I walked through those doors. I was greeted by my supervisor, Thomas Bradley, a former General Motors engineer who had been at Atlas for 8 years. Tom was a good man. I could tell that immediately. He had a warm handshake, an easy smile, and a genuine passion for his work. David, he said, welcome to the team. We're going to do great things together. For the first several months, I believed him. I threw myself into the job with everything I had. I reviewed brake system designs, analyzed test data, conducted inspections, and collaborated with manufacturing teams to ensure quality standards were met. The work was challenging and fulfilling. I felt like I was making a difference. But gradually, I started noticing things that didn't add up. It began with the Atlas Voyager's brake pads. During routine testing, I observed that certain batches were showing unusual wear patterns. The friction coefficient was lower than specification, which meant the brakes weren't gripping as effectively as they should. In normal driving conditions, this might go unnoticed. But in emergency braking situations, the moments when brakes really matter, it could be the difference between stopping in time and crashing. I flagged the issue and ran additional tests. The results confirmed my suspicions. Approximately 15% of the brake pads being installed in Voyagers were substandard. I traced the problem to a change in suppliers. 6 months earlier, Atlas had switched from a Japanese manufacturer with an impeccable safety record to a Chinese factory that offered components at 40% lower cost. The quality control documentation from this new supplier was suspiciously perfect. Too consistent, too clean, as if it had been fabricated to pass inspection. When I dug deeper, I discovered something even more disturbing. The factory in question had failed independent safety audits twice in the previous 3 years. Those failures had been documented by a third-party inspection firm. But somehow, none of that information had made it into Atlas's supplier qualification files. Someone had deliberately hidden those audit failures. I couldn't sleep that night. I kept running the numbers in my head, calculating the risk. If 15% of Voyagers had substandard brakes, and Atlas had sold 2 million Voyagers in the past year, that meant 300,000 vehicles on the road with potentially defective brake systems. 300,000 families who trusted Atlas to keep them safe. The next morning, I went straight to Tom Bradley's office. Tom listened carefully as I explained what I had found. His expression grew more troubled with every word. When I finished, he sat in silence for a long moment. "David," he finally said, "I believe you, and this scares the hell out of me." He told me to document everything, to create a formal report with all the evidence, all the test results, all the connections to the supplier's failed audits. He said he would personally take it to the executive team. I spent 2 weeks preparing that report. 49 pages of meticulous documentation. Every data point verified. Every conclusion supported by evidence. I put everything I had into it because I believed it would save lives. I submitted the report on March 15, 2016. The date is seared into my memory. Tom took it to a meeting with the VP of Manufacturing, Richard Hayes, and the Chief Operating Officer, Sandra Morris. I wasn't invited to that meeting, but Tom promised to update me afterward. When he came back to my office that afternoon, his face told me everything I needed to know before he said a word. "They're not going to do anything," he said, his voice hollow. I didn't understand. How could they not do anything? People could die, Tom explained. A recall would cost the company an estimated $400 million. The stock price would plummet. Shareholders would lose billions. And Marcus Wellington, who had staked his reputation on the Voyager's success, would be humiliated. "They're calling it an acceptable risk," Tom said bitterly. "They've calculated the probable number of accidents, multiplied by the average settlement cost, and decided it's cheaper to deal with the lawsuits than to fix the problem." I felt sick. "We can't let this happen." Tom looked at me with eyes full of pain. "David, I've been fighting battles like this for 8 years. Sometimes you win. Most of the time you don't. This company, it's not what I thought it was." He advised me to let it go, to keep my head down, to protect my career and my family. But I couldn't do that. I couldn't look at myself in the mirror knowing that people might die because I was afraid to speak up. I decided to go over everyone's heads. I wrote a letter directly to Marcus Wellington, the CEO, outlining everything I had discovered. I hand-delivered it to his executive assistant and requested a personal meeting. 3 days later, I was called to a conference room on the executive floor. When I walked in, I found Marcus Wellington, Richard Hayes, Sandra Morris, the head of human resources, and 2 people I didn't recognize who I later learned were attorneys. Marcus Wellington was exactly what you'd expect from a billionaire CEO. Perfectly tailored suit, silver hair, confident posture, and eyes that looked through you rather than at you. He studied me the way a scientist might study a particularly annoying insect. The meeting lasted 8 minutes. They accused me of creating falsified data to sabotage the company, of being mentally unstable, of having a personal vendetta against Atlas Motors. They said my report was a fabrication, that the brake tests I cited had never been conducted, that the supplier documentation I referenced didn't exist. Richard Hayes spoke last. He looked directly at me and said, "David, I've reviewed your personnel file. The consensus among your supervisors is clear. You're not a team player. You don't understand how business works. Frankly, you're useless to this company. You're terminated, effective immediately. Useless. That word landed like a punch to the gut. Security escorted me to my desk. I had 15 minutes to collect my belongings under their watchful eyes. My colleagues pretended not to see me. No one said goodbye. No one offered support. I walked out of that building with a cardboard box in my hands and the word useless echoing in my head. But they didn't know that I had made copies of everything. 3 copies. One I had mailed to myself via certified mail with a dated postmark. One I had given to my brother for safekeeping. And one I had stored in a safety deposit box. What followed were the darkest years of my life. No one in the automotive industry would hire me. Atlas Motors had connections everywhere. Word spread that I was a troublemaker, a disgruntled employee who had fabricated accusations against my former company. In Detroit, where the auto industry was everything, that label was a death sentence. My wife, Jennifer, stood by me through everything. She never once suggested I should have kept quiet. She worked extra shifts as a nurse to keep us afloat while I searched desperately for work. Our 2 daughters, Emma and Lily, were too young to understand why Daddy was home all the time now. Why we had to move from our nice house to a small apartment. Why Christmas was smaller that year. I took whatever work I could find. I drove for Uber. I did freelance consulting for small businesses. I worked nights stocking shelves at a warehouse. Anything to help pay the bills. And every night I would lie awake wondering if I had made the right choice. Wondering if my principles were worth destroying my family's stability. Wondering if maybe they were right and I was just useless. There were nights when the weight of it all felt unbearable. Nights when I sat alone in the dark and thought about giving up. Not just on my fight against Atlas. On everything. But then I would look at my daughters sleeping peacefully, trusting that their father would keep them safe. And I would think about all the other fathers and mothers out there, driving Voyagers, trusting that Atlas Motors had done the same. I couldn't give up on them. In the summer of 2018, my worst fears became reality. A family of 4 was driving home from a vacation in Ohio when their Atlas Voyager failed to stop at an intersection. The brakes had failed catastrophically. The father tried to avoid the collision, but there was nothing he could do. Their car was struck by a delivery truck. The parents, Michael and Sarah Patterson, died instantly. Their 2 children, ages 7 and 9, spent weeks in intensive care. The little girl, Olivia, suffered a traumatic brain injury that left her with permanent cognitive impairment. When I heard the news, I broke down completely. I knew that this was exactly what I had warned about. Those children had lost their parents because Atlas Motors decided that profit was more important than their lives. Over the next 2 years, the accidents multiplied. A young mother killed when her Voyager couldn't stop on a rain-slicked highway. An elderly couple who died after their car rear-ended a school bus. A 23-year-old graduate student whose promising life ended at an intersection she should have been able to stop at. 12 people died. Dozens more were injured. And every single time, I wondered if I could have done more. If I should have fought harder. If their blood was somehow on my hands because I hadn't found a way to be heard. In early 2019, a class action lawsuit was filed against Atlas Motors by the families of the victims. The lead attorney was a woman named Catherine Brooks, a former federal prosecutor who had made her name taking on corporate giants. When she started investigating Atlas's brake systems, my name came up. She tracked me down through a mutual contact and asked if we could meet. I drove to her office in Chicago on a cold February morning. Catherine was in her 50s, with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. She listened to my story for 3 hours without interrupting. She asked to see my documentation. When I showed her the sealed envelope with the 2016 postmark, the copies of my report, the evidence I had preserved for 3 years, she leaned back in her chair and let out a long breath. "David," she said, "do you understand what you have here? This proves that Atlas knew about the brake defects years before anyone died. This proves they deliberately covered it up. This is the smoking gun." She asked if I was willing to testify. I told her I had been waiting 3 years for someone to ask. The trial began in October 2019 in federal court in Detroit. Atlas Motors had assembled a legal dream team, 12 attorneys from 3 of the most prestigious firms in the country. Their lead counsel, Robert Drake, was famous for his ability to destroy witnesses on the stand. He had never lost a case of this magnitude. On the other side, there was Catherine Brooks, a small team of junior attorneys, and me, the ex-employee who had been called useless. The trial lasted 5 months. It was the most grueling experience of my life. Atlas's strategy was predictable but devastating. They attacked my credibility relentlessly. They brought in psychologists who suggested I might have fabricated memories. They found former co-workers willing to testify that I was difficult, antisocial, and prone to conspiracy theories. They painted me as a bitter man, seeking revenge against the company that had rightfully fired him. Robert Drake cross-examined me for 2 full days. He twisted my words, implied that I had manufactured evidence, suggested that I was motivated by greed rather than conscience. There were moments when I questioned myself, when the force of his arguments made me wonder if maybe I really was the unstable person they described. But I held on to the truth. I answered every question, honestly. I refused to be broken. The turning point came in the 4th month of the trial. Catherine received a phone call from someone who refused to give their name. They said only that they worked at Atlas Motors and had information that could change everything. They agreed to meet at a diner outside of Detroit. Catherine asked me to come with her. When we arrived, I was stunned to see who was waiting for us. It was Tom Bradley, my former supervisor, the man who had advised me to let it go and protect my career. Tom looked like he had aged a decade in 4 years. His hair had gone completely gray. His hands trembled as he held his coffee cup. I couldn't live with it anymore, he said. The nightmares, the guilt. Every time I saw another accident on the news, I knew I was partly responsible. Tom had evidence. Not just any evidence. He had the original files from Marcus Wellington's personal server. Emails between executives discussing how to suppress my report. Memos calculating the cost of deaths versus the cost of a recall. Meeting notes where they literally referred to potential fatalities as acceptable losses. And most damning of all, the original copy of my report, with the official date stamp and the signatures acknowledging receipt. The same report they had sworn under oath didn't exist. Tom had been secretly copying files for months, building a case, waiting for the right moment. The deaths had finally pushed him over the edge. He couldn't stay silent any longer. When Catherine presented this evidence in court, the reaction was explosive. Judge Patricia Williams, who had maintained a neutral demeanor throughout the trial, visibly recoiled as she reviewed the documents. The jury members looked physically ill. The families of the victims wept openly. Robert Drake tried to object, to challenge the admissibility of the evidence, to create any delay he could. But Judge Williams wasn't having it. She ordered the evidence admitted and called for a recess. When court resumed, she had words for the defense. "In 30 years on the bench," she said, her voice tight with barely contained fury, "I have never seen such a blatant disregard for human life. The executives of Atlas Motors didn't just make a business decision. They calculated the value of human lives against their profit margins and decided that dead customers were an acceptable cost of doing business." She turned to look at me, sitting in the witness box. Mr. Chen tried to prevent this tragedy. He put his career, his reputation, and his family's well-being on the line to do the right thing. And for that, he was called useless and thrown away like garbage. Her gaze shifted to Marcus Wellington, who sat frozen at the defense table. The only useless people in this courtroom are those who had the power to save lives and chose not to. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. They found Atlas Motors liable on all counts. They awarded the plaintiffs $2.3 billion in damages, the largest automotive product liability verdict in American history. And they added punitive damages of another $800 million, specifically to send a message that corporations cannot treat human lives as acceptable losses. But the trial was just the beginning. The evidence that emerged led to a federal criminal investigation. Marcus Wellington, Richard Hayes, and Sandra Morris were indicted on charges including fraud, conspiracy, and involuntary manslaughter. All 3 were eventually convicted and sentenced to federal prison. Atlas Motors was forced to recall every Voyager ever manufactured. Over 3 million vehicles. The company's stock crashed. They filed for bankruptcy protection and were eventually acquired by a competitor who promised to prioritize safety. New federal regulations were passed requiring more rigorous, independent testing of automotive components. Whistleblower protections were strengthened. The case became a landmark in corporate accountability. As for me, I received a settlement that allowed my family to rebuild our lives. Jennifer could finally stop working double shifts. Emma and Lily got to grow up in a stable home. My parents, who had watched their son struggle for years, finally saw the rewards of doing the right thing. I used part of the money to establish the Patterson Foundation, named after the family whose tragedy had first brought national attention to the crisis. The foundation provides support for victims of corporate negligence and funds research into automotive safety. Olivia Patterson, the little girl who lost her parents and suffered permanent injury, is now the foundation's honorary ambassador. Tom Bradley became a close friend. He testified in the criminal trials and helped ensure that justice was fully served. He told me once that cooperating was the only way he could live with himself. I understood completely. Last year, I was invited to speak at the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration's annual conference. As I stood at that podium, looking out at hundreds of safety engineers and regulators, I thought about my father in that restaurant kitchen, about my mother at her sewing machine, about the faith they had in doing the right thing. They called me useless, I told the audience. They said I didn't understand how business works. They tried to destroy me for telling the truth. I paused to compose myself. But I want you to know something. Every single person in this room who speaks up about a safety concern, who refuses to stay silent when lives are at stake, who chooses integrity over comfort, you are not useless. You are the reason we can trust the cars we drive, the planes we fly, the products we use every day. You are the guardians of public safety. Never let anyone make you forget that. The applause lasted for several minutes. Afterwards, dozens of engineers approached me with their own stories. Concerns they had raised, battles they had fought, times they had been pressured to stay silent. Some of them were still fighting. I gave them my contact information and promised to help however I could. The word useless no longer has power over me. I understand now what it really meant. It was a weapon used by people who were afraid of the truth. It was a desperate attempt to silence someone who threatened their profits and their power. Useless is the person who watches innocent people die and does nothing. Useless is the person who calculates the value of human lives in dollars and cents. Useless is the person who thinks power protects them from consequences. I was never useless. I was the one who saw what others refused to see. I was the one who spoke when everyone told me to be quiet. I was the one who held onto the truth when everything seemed hopeless. And if you're watching this, if you're going through something similar, if someone has called you useless for trying to do the right thing, I want you to hear me clearly. Don't give up. The road may be long, the cost may be high, but the truth has a power that no lie can overcome. One day, when you least expect it, the hidden report will hit the judge's desk, and on that day, you will look into the eyes of everyone who doubted you and know that it was all worth it. If this story touched you, if it inspired you, if it reminded you that integrity matters, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and share this story with someone who needs to hear it today. And tell me in the comments, have you ever been underestimated? Have you ever been called useless and proved them wrong? I want to hear your story. See you in the next video.